Hello, welcome to Petrol Media, and today we're going to discuss 10 reasons to go DAWless. Now, what I mean by this is in the creative process, reasons to go DAWless. I'm not saying that you shouldn't finish your mix in a computer. I'm just saying in the creative process, while things are moving, why going DAWless is great. For those who don't know what a DAW is a digital audio workstation. Every single computer software for recording, producing, and creating music is most likely a variant or is a actual DAW, digital audio workstation. And they have gotten so sophisticated to the point that you really don't need any of this outboard gear to do anything. There are people who are making whole albums with just an iPad. That doesn't mean that it diminishes the value of these things, and it doesn't mean that that's better. I'm just giving you 10 reasons why this might be something you would consider going down in your creative process. When I start to create music, I start here and then I end there. And before we begin, I've put a bunch of links down in the bottom of the description for different products that I support as items that I would suggest for anyone who's just getting into production, anything from the beginning, the middle, and more advanced equipment for those for home use as well as in studio. Feel free to check some things out. It's one way you can support my channel. Like, share, subscribe, and let's get into it. So we're gonna start with number 10, the workflow. It is simple and easy. There's nothing complex about the way things work, especially if you get the right pieces of gear that work well together for you, or the one piece of gear that works well for you. When I'm producing music in the Roland Phantom X, it has 16 tracks for me to work with. The great thing about that workstation setup, it is a tried and true system, allowing you to marry this device to an MPC or any other groove box that allows for MIDI in and out and has multiple channels for mixing and producing. In that scenario, they also have 16 channels for each of the MIDI devices it can control. The Phantom X is pretty straightforward. I get into the patches, I jump to the mixer and the sequencing, and I literally just get to work. There's no launching and setting up of the session. It's pretty much pick a channel, set a tempo, pick a sound, and go. The big benefit in that scenario is it allows you to just get going and flowing. The MPCs are the same way. Whether you start with the 5,000, start with the 1,000, or any other MPC, you basically have the same thing. The machine takes a moment. This one is running JJOS 316. I'm actually really starting to like it a lot. I don't know if I'm gonna upgrade it to the JJOS XL3. I think I'm gonna probably stay here with this one. But this works really well for me. Also, it keeps it completely compatible with the 5,000. So I can use my 1,000 as a sketch pad that travels with me almost everywhere whenever I need to do anything. And then I can transfer it to the 5,000 to complete whatever I'm working on before bringing it into the MPC2 software and into my DAW. Number 9, familiar feel. I have used an MPC in one way, shape, or form since the year 2001. Back in 2001, I started to get into music production more professionally. Prior to that, I had a couple of little pieces like the Boss SP202 and the Yamaha DJX keyboard. Nothing too fancy, just kind of did a little something. But then when I got the 2000 XL, it was the first time I really, truly got into using an MPC. And I realized how powerful these things can be. Even though it only had a few minutes of time max, it still was such a powerful tool. And because of that experience, I jumped to the 1000 when it became available because, oh my God, all that extra sample time and essentially the same workflow as the 2000 XL. I didn't miss a beat with that. I jumped on it and I was excited to go down that path. And I only parted with those machines when the Phantom X came along and I realized how much more powerful this was. This device is so much more powerful than the 2000 XL and the 1000 that I was able to live in this on its own. But eventually I realized that the music I was making in the software as well as on the keyboard was not always the same. And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. People make different types of style of music on different devices. They may not realize they're doing this, but you can hear it, especially if you pay attention. It will be somewhat similar from device to device, but it still shows the nuances of what this makes you do versus what this makes you do versus what something else makes you do. And The last time I had these two things paired together, it felt great. This prompted me to pick up the MPC 1000 and then shortly after the 5000, and I've been happy ever since. To me, it felt like riding a bicycle. It was almost like I never stopped riding a bicycle. I just took a break for a couple of years and got back on this. Oh, this is how this works. And within a few weeks, I was right back at it, like I never left. Number 8, pitching and tuning algorithms. Now, this is up for interpretation. I will say this. It is nearly impossible to replicate what these devices do themselves in software. I say this with a caveat that you should take it with a grain of salt. What I'm not saying is you can't get a decent facsimile of what that looks like in a software version of something or the newer version of something. But let's put it this way, and I think this is the best analogy that I've ever been given in life on the way technology works, the way everything works when it comes to music, because it's a lot more complicated than simply, I have the same thing and I can make the same thing. Let's say you are told that if you buy a Neumann U87 microphone with a very specific Pultec EQ and a very specific Fairchild compressor and a very specific UAD mic preamp, and it's the one the Beatles used, and it sounds amazing. And if you have the same thing, you can do the same thing too. Yes, you can kind of do the same thing. There's a couple of factors that come into play when it comes to older technology. Newer technology is very good at replicating the action exactly the same way all the time. Older technology doesn't work that way. And this is what people talk about when they say they get into the sonics of something and they're trying to understand why this was better than that. It's not about it being better or not. That's something we need to just all take, crumple up, and throw it out the window. You need to look at things from a different perspective. Going back to my analogy, you want to sound like the Beatles, so you bought $30,000 of a vocal chain of the Beatles equipment, but you're wondering why your stuff doesn't sound exactly like the Beatles. Well, let's take it from a different perspective. They recorded at Abbey Road. They recorded in the 60s. They had a cool winter day, let's say hypothetically. So the air is brisk and there's not a lot of humidity in the air. That's going to matter in a moment. And on top of that, you don't have Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and the rest of the boys to write, sing, produce your song. Now, you're already at a disadvantage because you don't have a time machine and there's physics at play in the equation. So to repeat, or I should say replicate exactly that performance, you have to get a time machine and go back. If your TARDIS is not set to that date, you're not getting that performance at all. That is how old technology works. And that was the circumstance for pretty much all the technology up until about the 2000 XL. Almost all of the technology had nuances that made the way the technology worked be slightly different from the other one. If you go back to the 3000, no two 3000 basically behaved the same way, meaning the way they functioned was the same, but sonically, they were all a little different. The SV1200, all of them were different. There was not a single one of them that was the same. And if you had a device like an oscilloscope to scan it and look at the signal, you send a tone in and look at the output, you'd see that because all the caps are at different temperatures and all the transistors are at different temperatures and the atmosphere and the humidity, because humidity matters with old technology. All of that is a part of the equation of why the technology did what it did. And that is something that everybody conveniently forgets. And that's why you like the old technology. All of those nuances, all those little details that you forget that cannot be replicated digitally. And as much as you can come close to it, once you hear it in the original version, it's hard to forget it. And then you realize you can't replicate it. And that's why people go back to this. Now, do you need to do that? No, it's a preference thing. It's really just a preference thing. I mean, I'm a Neve person. I love Neve everything, but I don't have Neve money. I'm fine with using Neve plugins to replicate it because I understand what it's supposed to sound like and I get as close as possible, but never for a second do I tell myself that this behaves the same way, because it can't. So in the middle of a conversation with one of the guys in the MPC groups, we were talking about replicating sounds, and I admitted, because he said, well, the MPC 1000 doesn't have a character to it, and the 2000 XL was kind of flat. It didn't really have a character to it. The older ones had a character to it. That character is all the stuff I just spoke about. The character in the 1000 was very transparent. What that means is whatever sonic characteristics you wanted this thing to have, you had to record it into it. If you didn't record it into it, it didn't have it. It's just that simple. And that was okay, because at that point, the electronics have gotten so good that it didn't matter, and they all behaved exactly the same way sonically. Nothing wrong with that. The 5000 is the same way. So when people want to compare it to other MPCs, it gets into that gray area again. It's like you can't compare this to that, because the 4000 had things about it that were a little different. And although the sonic characteristics of the 4000 was also pretty clean, a lot of people don't realize that, because the architecture of the sampler itself was a lot better at the time. This was off on a different tangent, like the tangent I'm currently going on. So we're gonna skip this conversation and not go down this road right now, because it'll completely make this video all over the place. This doesn't mean the new MPCs are bad. Again, it just means that if you want that character, find a way to record that character into those boxes, into the X, the Live 2, and et cetera, and create the sound you want, and then manipulate it like crazy, because that's what's great about the new technology. But that's not the video we're talking about today. Now, when it comes to older technology, as I've learned from another video you'll probably see either before or after this video, I learned that the 2000 XL is completely compatible with the MPC2 software, which is great because it makes it so that I can actually access those files, and I don't actually have to go back and buy a 2000 XL. Why does that matter? That comes to my number 7, conversion. When it comes to converting your files from older technology to newer technology, it can be a little daunting, but if you go back to a point where it makes the most sense for you, it's actually pretty easy. So in my case, I chose not to go back to the point where I absolutely have to use my mixing console to actually track things in. Although I can when I want to, and if I need to, I can do that. I actually love the fact that I can simply take the files off of the MPCs and plug them into my computer and transfer the sessions, and it pops up and I can create my stems. Great compatibility between the 1000 and the 5000. So converting files from one format to another, that is a great feature of the older technology when you have the right types of technology. A little bit harder with the Phantom X just because you have to track things out. But again, I have workarounds for that. And that's another thing. If you find workarounds, creating workarounds actually forces you to use this thing up here to come up with creative ways to combat whatever you feel is a hurdle. That's great because it pushes your abilities. And when you come to dealing with software, all of a sudden that becomes easier. Number 6 is no visuals. You're not staring at MIDI data. You're not staring at WAV files when you're creating on a piece of hardware. You're literally, it's just you and the hardware. Even the Phantom, although it does show you MIDI data when you're recording, it doesn't show you the exact data. It just shows you the recording of a big block. And you can't see what's in that block when it's recording on the track you're recording in. It's only afterwards you can hit the micro view so you can actually look really into it and see what's going on and adjust if you need to. But most of the time, it's just simpler to play things back. That goes back to the other issue. People talk about needing to have the ability to copy and paste MIDI data in these devices. Why are you doing that? Just replay it. Because that's how it's worked for years. That's what everybody else does. And it has never failed. You make a mistake, you replay it. You make a mistake, replay it. Guess what's happening in the middle of that process? You are learning how to play that thing better and better and better. And all of a sudden, you get faster and faster and faster. Think about that. Number 5 comes to speed. Now, I know this is controversial because everybody's like, oh, I don't know about that. How is it faster than a DAW? It's not. But what I mean by that is with a device like this, like let's say I pick up MPC 1000 and I'm starting to work on a record. Now, most likely what's happened already before I got to this point is I've picked out whatever I was going to sample, I've chopped it up, I've created a session, and I have a close proximity of what I think the tempo should be like. Loading files in the MPC 1000 is pretty fast. Same thing with the 5000. The Phantom takes a little bit of time because I have a ton of samples on it, so I have to like turn it on and let it run. That's slow. When I'm talking about speed, we're talking about the creative process itself. For me to make a beat on this thing takes me 5 minutes, period. Once I have the idea, I will spend, I don't know, 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes max noodling around and playing around with the idea, just trying to figure out what the melody and the flow of the session's gonna be. But once I've figured it out, it's quick. 5 minutes or so, the whole beat is done. And in the DAW, I've been able to do the same thing because I have templates. And the only reason I can go fast in something like Logic is because I have templates. If I have to start from scratch with nothing whatsoever and go digging around in all of the millions of plugins that I have on my computer, it's gonna take me a while to get through all of that. And eventually, I can sometimes get frustrated with it. Whereas with this, it's boom, 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 done. Take this, dump it in Logic, oh, add 2 or 3 more things. And also, that simplicity forces you to come up with some amazing solutions for the sounds that you didn't think of. That's why I said hardware tends to be faster than software in the creative part of the process. Number 4, conversion. Number 4 has to do with recording the data into the device. When you sample something into the MPCs or into the Phantom, which I didn't think about it before, and you can beat me up in the comments, but the way the sampler in the Phantom X works, it is quite literally a modern interpretation of an ASR 10. And I mean that in the most faithful, polite way. I am not taking away anything from the ASR 10 because the ASR 10 does some phenomenal things to sounds, but the way it behaves, it's just, you'll understand if you own a Phantom X, you'll understand what I'm talking about. If you don't, you should try one out. You'll understand what I'm talking about after that. And most newer keyboards have the same behavior in there. You just kind of have to dig for it. But again, not gonna dig into that too deep. Every single MPC before the 1000 had the ability of coloring the sound as it's being recorded in. So the 2000 XL imparted its character into it. Even though it was pretty flat, it still had character to it. The drums were punchier. There was the snares tend to be snappier. There was almost like there was a little bit of degrading of the actual audio that went into the device. So it definitely made its own imprint on the actual sound. The 3000, whew, that's a whole nother argument. 3000 just, it does its thing to sounds. The 4000, again, a little bit more transparent, but it was supposed to be because the sampler was just better than the 2000 XL. The 60, just way down into the lo-fi, the 62, same thing. You know, all of them were like that. The ASR 10, we don't even know what kind of magic they put in the ASR 10. The ASR 10 just doesn't make sense. It just sounds phenomenal. And that's why everybody always chases one, even though it's such a pain to deal with the device makes it sound amazing. So the conversion and what the technology of the day is doing to the sounds matters. That's why I say converters are important on the older devices. Number 3, no updates. Many people will think no updates is a bad thing. No updates on hardware is actually a great thing. Before our current situation where everything had to be compatible with everything beyond just the analog MIDI connection, things didn't have all of that. It was like, however it worked is how it worked. That was it. So the Phantom has a version 1, version 2, that is it for OS. The 5000, thanks to all the bad publicity, has a version 1 and a version 2 for the OS. Version 1 was terrible. The version 2 fixed every single one of the complaints and it basically made it have no problems. Hence the reason there isn't a version 3 for that OS. The 1000 is set up in a similar manner. However, this 1000 has JJOS. And again, mine has JJOS 316. I actually really like JJOS 316, so I don't know if I'm gonna bother with buying the other version. My understanding is XL3 is not compatible with the 5000. That would break what I have going on, so it doesn't make any sense. But that goes back to what I just said. Everything works together. So I don't have to worry about fixing it when it comes to the software of the actual device. It is highly unlikely that any of these things will get corrupted. If it was corrupted, it's gonna be my fault, not the actual hardware. Usually the software problems are the user fault because the user did something they shouldn't have done, or they went digging in somewhere they shouldn't have done. So for the most part, I don't have to worry about any of those things. I just know I can turn it on, boom, 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 done. When you deal with software, you start dealing with things called driver signage and certificates. If you don't know what those things are, because I used to do IT, those things tell the devices what hardware and what software can work on your device. Now, I ran into this recently because in Windows 11, it is not by default set up to function with DVD and CD drives. Why does that matter? That matters because I have thousands of CDs and DVDs full of audio from all my years in music, almost 28 years now, that I couldn't access at all. And I had to go digging and digging and digging and going through all of these things online until I figured out how to solve that problem. And it was one of the most frustrating things. It was a very simple solution. There's a click that I had to check, but I didn't know where to find it. And that's kind of the issue. When it comes to software, everything works until someone makes an update. Whenever an operating system changes, by the way, when an operating system changes, never update your technology. Wait till every single manufacturer of your software is completely compatible. I run Logic, and Apple makes a new operating system almost every 2 to 3 years, and I don't update. If Universal Audio, Plug-in Alliance, Plug-in Boutique, Softtube, Waves, if none of these technologies are working right, I'm not updating this because all I just did was turn my computer into a giant audio brick. That is why I start with hardware and then move to software. I know I can recall things in a heartbeat if I need to from these devices because I know how they work. And that leads into my number 2, reliability. The reliability of these devices, these specific devices that I chose. I'm not gonna say that it's reliability of all hardware and all older technology. I'm just talking about the reliability of my hardware. I know these things, I will turn them on and they will function and they will run and they will not have an issue. I have run the Phantom for hours and hours. I think I've actually had this thing on for a couple of days nonstop and just not even worried about it because I knew it was gonna be fine. The NPCs, usually I run them for like 6 to 8, 10 hours, depending. No issues whatsoever, nothing overheating. I have proper ventilation on all my stuff. So I'm not that worried about my tech because I went through and planned and prepared for it. But when it comes to creating music on them, I don't have to think about what I'm doing. When you're in the creative mood and the creative moment, you don't want to be thinking too much about where things are. I have used a Phantom since 2005. I've used an MPC in one shape or form since 2001. I literally know these like the back of my hand at this point. And even to this day, I'm still learning new things about them that I never realized I had access to. But even then, it's just an added bonus about what I already understand about the technology. And it just benefits me. So it makes it so much faster and easier to be creative because I know where all the functions are. The number one reason why I start DAWless for everything before transferring anything is creativity. There is creativity in limitations. And what does that mean? When I create in Logic, I literally have to use the templates that I created for creativity to force me in certain directions. Because I know if I open up a blank slate of Logic and I go to the instrument panel, there's gonna be about 40 or 50 different manufacturers, and almost all of them have anywhere from 2 to 12 different instruments. That is a lot of stuff to dig through, and each of those instruments have thousands of patches. Now, that gives you an infinite list of possibilities. The problem with that is you still need to know exactly the one you want to start with, or even for that matter, the ones you know are your go-tos. And with hardware, that happens really, really fast. Because for starters, with the MPCs, with the older ones before these, they came empty. There was nothing in them. The 5000 and the 1000, they come with sounds, but they're limited sounds, but they're there. At least with the 5000, and we'll dive into it a little bit more in another video, it actually has a synth built in that's really, really solid. And it actually comes with a grand piano and a string section. So I kind of could just do most of it minus the horns here. With the 1000, in a similar fashion, because I have a ton of sounds that I've already put in there, I can just access the data and get moving. Overall, I still have to be very focused on my decisions. Now, that means you dial in exactly what you want to do. I've picked this sample. I like this sample. I'm going to sample this sample into the device. I'm going to add the drums I want to use in this device, or the drum break that I'm going to chop all of the individual sounds from to make this work, because these all work together. That is important a little bit later on, matching sounds together. A lot easier when it's a drum break and all the drums, the snares and everything goes together, and then you can just flavor it afterwards. The other side of this, when you're creating, what ends up happening is you are now working in a scenario where you only have 16 tracks. So that makes you very decisive. The drum on the first track, snare on the next track, hi-hat, yada, yada, yada. Oh, good. Now I have about 6 or 7 tracks more. I know the MPCs can go further and have 64 tracks, but I don't do it. I use like 16 at most. And honestly, most of my records are like 12 tracks at most. When I do this inside of the software, I'll have 10, 20, 30, 40 tracks, because you just keep adding. But when you're using the hardware, a lot of times the sounds are a little bit richer and fuller because they had to be, because you only had 16 tracks, because they knew their users are only going to use so many tracks on the device. So you tend to make very specific choices, and that speeds up your creativity because it forces you to think about how you want it to work, and you just get into a groove and go. When you deal with software, unless you're using templates and unless you've already pre-picked things and you've dug through the millions of sounds that you have, you're probably not going to make very savvy choices, because you're just going to be digging, and that burns up a whole bunch of your time. So that's my list of 10 reasons why to start DAWless and why it's great to start in hardware before moving to software. Join me next week when I discuss why it's great to work in software and not hardware. I hope you guys have been enjoying this series of videos. I've been really enjoying making them and sharing my knowledge from all of my time in the entertainment industry. Like, share, and subscribe. Join me next time, and I'll catch you later.